Hey everybody, I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Our guest programmer this month on TCM is an Academy Award-winning screenwriter, a successful director, and an actor with 2 Oscar nominations. His screen credits include Sling Blade, Monsters Ball, A Simple Plan, The Man Who Wasn't There, and Bandits. He also made audiences wonderfully uncomfortable as an oddly likable, sadistic killer on season 1 of the FX series Fargo. And get this, he is also a country rock musician with 4 solo albums and 5 albums with the band the Boxmasters. Their most recent album, dropped this past August. Ladies and gentlemen, Billy Bob Thornton, welcome.
Glad to be here.
Billy Bob's next selection is a Western from 1973 that everybody ought to know, directed by Sam Peckinpah, featuring in a supporting role another musician of some note named Bob Dylan. It's Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. So, there's no way you don't love Bob Dylan.
Absolutely.
Is that part of why you picked this movie?
You don't, not really.
Really?
What sets Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid apart from other Westerns for me is it was the first rock and roll Western.
What do you mean?
And aside from Bob Dylan, if Bob Dylan hadn't been in it, although the score, the soundtrack was beautiful and perfect for it.
And he did a number of songs for it.
Yes, he did. And it's because you had all these hardened character actors in there with Sam Peckinpah directing it, you know, with all that turmoil and angst and weirdness and whatever they were doing, because, you know, Peckinpah was quite a character. They embody the sort of rebellious rock and roll sensibility. They have that thing to them. And I think he always saw himself as he always related to the characters and the stories in some way. He struggled within himself, you know, from what I've read about him. And so he always saw this guy who didn't know his place in the world or whatever it was, you know, the outlaw in him. I think he was making movies about his own turmoil in his head.
And that sort of, it works for both characters, doesn't it? It's not just Billy the Kid, but Pat Garrett too.
You know, I think Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid were the 2 sides of Peckinpah, and I think it's probably why I wanted to make the movie. And I think, at least for me and most of my friends who watch these movies, prefer Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid to the Wild Bunch. Because the Wild Bunch you'd seen in a way. I mean, you've got the Magnificent Seven and other movies like that. The Wild Bunch, while it was a great movie, there wasn't anything in it that I hadn't seen before in some way.
There's a unique quality to Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid I can't disagree with. I love Ride the High Country. That's my favorite Peckinpah movie. I like it better than The Wild Bunch too. The Wild Bunch, it's funny that you mentioned, I mean, it's great. No one's knocking it. But it does. It's like the Magnificent Seven, except as bloody as the Magnificent Seven ought to have been.
Yes, exactly. You know, that's right. I think that's probably what Peckinpah brought along at that point that maybe we hadn't seen. He was one of the first guys to really show a lot of blood splattering.
Yeah. You know? And he'll do it. There's plenty of blood splatter.
Plenty of that in here.
Although there's something real quick about Robert Ryan's performance in The Wild Bunch that I can't quite get enough of. I love it.
Oh, I agree. Yeah. I loved Robert Ryan. And each one, I mean, when this movie starts and James Coburn comes into this little village and they're shooting.
Yeah, they're target practice.
Target practicing. And then Coburn fires his rifle, and he and Billy the Kid go in and sit down and have a drink. And it's like you go in, and the only thing I can, compare it to is I go in to have a meeting with the big studio head. Me and the studio head don't get along at all, and we know that what we're there to talk about. But when you first see him, hey, Bill or Chuck or whatever the guy's name is, how's it going? Oh, how's the family? Everything's great. And then you sit down to talk about the problem on the movie.
Right.
Well, that's kind of what this is. You have the new sheriff who used to be his friend, and now he's got to get him out of the territory. This is Billy the Kid. And there's a line that just struck me, and this is what told me the first time I saw it, I'm in for something really cool and special here. Coburn tells Billy that he's got to get out of town or I'm going to make you. And Billy asks him, how does it feel? Basically, how does it feel to be on the other side of the law now?
Right.
Have that badge on. And Coburn looks at him and says, feels like times have changed.
Right, feels like times have changed. That's right.
And I'm like, well, okay, this is going somewhere, you know.
And later, Billy points out, which you already really brought up, that moment of Billy saying, "Hey, man, the law is suggesting that the law is a nebulous thing. 10 years ago, he was the outlaw, and I was the law. So who's to say what the law is or what it's going to be 5, 10 years from now?"
Absolutely, it's different than the John Wayne,
Yeah, right.
Gary Cooper sort of sheriff in movies. You know, it's like the good guy he believed in justice. You know, and what was true in the Old West was that most people who were hired as marshals and sheriffs were gunslingers.
and that's right, of course, because that's who's going to be good at that job.
Exactly.
Too. And Christopherson gives a really, you know, the more I think about it, a really nice performance, because you were there are many moments when you could definitively make up your mind about whether you like Billy the Kid or don't. Overall, I think you'll find at the end of the movie you're going to like him. But then when you look back on it, you'll think, oh, wait a minute, he shot another guy I liked in the back.
Right.
How can I like him?
Who was his friend?
Right, that's right. Who was
part of
his
his gang at
They
one
were just
point.
playing cards.
Yeah. Absolutely. And by the way, I'm not sure exactly how old he was, but this is one of those things that you just have to, two things to say about this. Christopherson was probably 35 or whatever he was. You know, Billy the Kid was killed when he was 21.
Right.
And that's something that a lot of times in movies in those days and before, people didn't worry about that much. These days, critics get on movies instantly for, well, how is he, because Churchill was really only 47 at this time, and this actor is 54, and it's like, who cares?
Right. Well,
you know, just suck it in, and you know, whatever.
But also, there were a lot of decisions that Peckinpah made. First of all, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid weren't friends, really. I mean,
Right.
he made them have this much closer friendship. And it occurs to me, and I was reading about Pat Garrett after seeing this movie again. I did a little Pat Garrett research, and yeah, I know that mostly means I just went to Wikipedia, but nonetheless, but Pat Garrett was much younger than Coburn, so like he changed the ages. So
Sure.
So what? What difference does it make?
Yeah.
You know?
Just telling a story.
So you mentioned other singers in it, right? So we got Dylan, right, and we have Slim Pickens, right,
Slim Pickens.
and Christopherson, obviously.
Christopherson.
And,
Chill Wills was another
Jill Wills,
guy in there.
but Rita Coolidge,
Rita Coolidge.
right? So yeah.
Absolutely. Who ended up Christopherson's wife and sang with Joe Cocker and did her own solo
Did her-
career.
Yeah, no, I have a Rita Coolidge song on my iPhone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I mean,
She's got a great
absolutely.
voice.
Yeah, I mean, you had like these, like I said, there was a sort of outlaw nature to all the people in the movie. And you know, Peckinpah himself actually has a cameo in the movie.
I think I forgot that.
Yeah.
Where is he in the movie? Where can people see Peckinpah?
Peckinpah is at the end of the movie. Peckinpah is working on a coffin with a hammer as Coburn passes him, and with disgust, Peckinpah looks at him because he knows why he's there, to get Billy, and he says, "Well, Garrett, just get on with it." You can tell in that moment in his cameo that he knew the story he was telling, and he knows his you know, that the Coburn character, he knows exactly what a creep he is for killing this guy when he's exactly who he is. So the people, the scholars of the film business have written about that before, about how it looked like Peckinpah was talking to himself.
Hey everybody, joining me once again as our guest programmer this month. He selected Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, writer, director, actor, musician, Billy Bob Thornton. So the version we just saw, that wasn't the original theatrical version, which was taken away from Peckinpah.
Yes.
Peckinpah often had a movie taken away from him. But this version that we now love is the restored Peckinpah version.
Right. Yeah, I think that opening with the cutting back and forth between the black and white with Coburn and the beginning of the movie shooting the chickens and all that, I think that maybe the original theatrical version didn't have that in there. And you can imagine Peckinpah being the kind of guy that would be at odds with the studio. I mean, you know, he was that type. And but there were lines that, even in the version now, that I think weren't what I first saw. Because, and just little things, you know, just noticing one or two words of dialogue that aren't in there. Coburn says to Richard Bright, who's hanging out when they're doing the target practice in the beginning, "How the senoritas down in Mexico there, Pat?" And it's, "They're fine," or what, I can't remember the exact words. And Richard Bright said, "Yeah?" And he says, "Yeah. Yeah?" They did it like 3 or 4 times.
Right,
and in this they didn't do that. So it's just little bitty things like that also that are nuances that you love about the way he made a movie, and people don't understand sometimes how much that could affect a movie. You know,
we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I'm curious now as to why. I asked you, I sensed that you would love to have worked with Peckinpah, and you were like, "Oh yeah," and all the Peckinpah nonsense and the drinking and the paranoia. You would have been okay with that. What is it about Peckinpah that attracts you to his work?
he wasn't like the artiste type.
No.
and yet he was an artist.
Yeah, clearly.
He wasn't a man's man to the point where he's like a sports bar guy, but he was a man's man nevertheless. He was a sensitive guy and a callous guy. He was all the things that go into the characters that you want to play as an actor.
I was going to say, that's exactly full of dramatic contradictions.
Absolutely.
Exactly what you would be attracted to. So, I mean, now all of a sudden I'm like, so where's the movie where you play Sam Peckinpah? Like, that's a...
You know, I was asked to play Sam Peckinpah.
Really?
Years ago, somebody was going to make a movie about Sam Peckinpah, and it never happened, and they talked to me. It wasn't far enough down the road to where I got the offer.
I got you.
But it was a discussion about me playing Peckinpah, and I'll be the first actor to tell somebody when I'm wrong for the part. I've turned down things before because I've said I'm the wrong guy. And because one of the things that I learned that I think is one of the most valuable things I learned as an actor is know who you are. And my standard joke is, look, if you're making a movie about Charles de Gaulle, get a Frenchman.
Right.
I'm the wrong guy.
Right.
And I've been asked to play people before in real life, you know, like actual people, and I've said, I could never play this guy. There was talk about me playing Vince Lombardi, the famous football coach. I said, I'm as far from Vince Lombardi as you can be. And they said, yeah, but you can play anything. I said, because I'm known for playing all these different kinds of roles. Yeah. But they're within a certain wheelhouse.
So what do you think? Was that post Friday Night Lights that some people ask you to play Vince Lombardi? Because that would show me such a limited understanding of, like, well, he played a football coach and he was great, so sure, play that football coach.
I was honored to be asked, and it was before Friday Night Lights. So they saw something in me that I didn't, but then I was asked to play Davy Crockett. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Right. First of all, nobody knows how Davy Crockett talked.
right. Yeah.
You know, and then I've played a couple of James Carville-like characters.
Yes, right.
And that makes sense to me. But once again, if it's Winston Churchill or Charles de Gaulle, get an Englishman or a Frenchman. And which is another thing that, you know, it's a bone I always have to pick. It's like, we have plenty of guys from Texas who can do it, so we don't really need to get an Australian or an English actor to do that. And there are plenty of English and Australian actors, so you don't necessarily need a guy from the Bronx or Texas to play that, just because of the popularity factor. And I think that's what hurts movies sometimes, is the casting is based on who's got the box office draw right now, and so let's put someone who's really not right for the part there and turn him into Charles de Gaulle.
But for Peckinpah, you do it. If the movie, like, that's a guy you could play.
I can look at Sam Peckinpah, listen to him, read about him, and go, that makes sense to me.
Because it strikes me that the best Billy Bob Thornton characters they're complicated. They're guys filled with contradictions who you're admiring one minute and sort of repelled by the next. I
Absolutely.
mean, and that's who we want to read about. That's who we want to talk about in life, right?
Sure.
I mean, you know, it's less interesting to talk about guys who were, and they don't
No
really
doubt
exist
about it.
if they're just good.
No, absolutely.
And if they're just bad, then
If you watch the news, those aren't the lead story is not, nice guy does amazing thing for train passengers. You know.
all right, Billy Bob, this was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Good to see you. All right.
Billy Bob and I are done for the night, but don't go away because we've got more great movies coming up. And this being TCM, they are, of course, uncut and commercial free.